clearly?
Most recently, I started working with a gentleman who admitted that he is a compulsive eater as well. He eats maybe 8 Big Macs and he'll eat a whole pizza. And I've never heard of anyone eating this much food. But my question to you is, what suggestions do you have for me as I try to work with him? What can I do to help him overcome this binge eating?
Well, I think you have to talk to him about it in terms of it being larger than just about food, and that perhaps they can come in and talk to some professional. It's really the basis of my practice. I own the Friedman Psychology Group, and what we do there is deal specifically with eating disorders and long-term psychotherapy, because you can change behavior for a small amount of time. But again, like I said, with that steam in a pipe, unless you get to some of the root causes, it is only going to manifest in some other way. You may eat a little less, but you'll take up smoking. So,
Right.
You're going one step forward and 2 steps back. Anyone out there can give a call to the Friedman Psychology Group at 561-392-3221 and set up an appointment and take that first step towards changing your life.
Excellent. Some tips that I have for people just starting out as far as the physical part of it. If you're obese and you're just beginning to exercise, please do me a favor and don't try what you see on The Biggest Loser. That show has the obese population exercising at a rate that is well beyond where they should be. Now, I understand you have to apply the overload principle when you're trying to lose weight. You have to push yourself. However, if you just start exercising and you go from 300 or 400 pounds to exercising 6 to 8 hours a day, you take a huge risk in injuring yourself. Now, what people don't realize, maybe they do, but just outside the cameras on that show are trained professionals ready to administer CPR if anybody drops. In fact, I've heard that there was a gentleman that competed on the show and spent a month in the hospital afterwards. Wow. Because of what happened to his body. It takes 2 to 4 weeks for our bodies to adjust to the new stresses that we're placing on it. That's why if we start off working out 6 to 8 hours a day, more than likely you're going to end up with shin splints, problems with your knees, problems with your back, and the least case scenario is you're going to drop the weight that you need to lose and develop new habits. Let me ask you, Dr. Friedman, have you seen people in your experience that when they come into your office and they have the eating disorder of obesity and they do begin a program, how many of these people have you seen actually be successful?
Well, I think a majority of them are successful if they stick with it and they have the right mindset. And again, like you said, when you start off in such a grand fashion, you're almost setting yourself up for failure. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
When you say that you're going to go from nothing to everything. And I think that really is a big component of eating disorders. People that have eating disorders tend to have very black and white, all or nothing thinking. So it's not unusual for them to say, okay, I've been eating 6,000 calories a day. Well, starting tomorrow, I'll do 1,000.
Right.
And I haven't been exercising, but I'm going to run a marathon in 6 months. And I think when you do that, you're creating a feeling of helplessness that is only going to stop you from doing it when you start to fail. I think hope is really an incredibly powerful tool and motivator. And when you put yourself in a position where you're constantly losing hope, then it's very hard to put yourself in a position to recover.
Well, I think setting realistic goals is important as well, because oftentimes we look in the magazines or to the television for our motivation, and we look at a model or an actor, and what we need to realize about those people is, they get paid a tremendous amount of money to look that way. They have a lot of time to invest in their exercise program. They have a lot of money and resources to invest. And if you don't have that same luxury, then setting a realistic goal is going to be a more effective approach in helping you stick with it. Because I've seen many times people set unrealistic goals and they get frustrated that they can't achieve that. How many times, Dr. Friedman, have you seen people set unrealistic goals? Is that something that you've run into as well in your practice?
Well, like I was saying, it's a part of an overall personality structure of black and white thinking. Either this food is good food or it's bad food. Either I had a good day eating or I had a terrible day eating. And if I start to have a terrible day eating in the morning, then I might as well just keep going and going and going throughout the day. and that carries over into the next day and the next day. So I think the more that we can get people away from black and white thinking, the better we are able to help them start to see that there's a lot of gray area that most people live in when they're eating, on a normal day-to-day basis.
And how would you compare the people that you talk to that have obesity and compulsive overeating? How would you compare that to the ones that have anorexia and bulimia?
Well, I think that there are so many similarities in all the eating disorders. One of them, like I said before, was the black and white thinking, and it's also just this obsession with food that takes them away from their day-to-day activities and hurts their day-to-day living. Even with anorexics, you'd be surprised. I have anorexics that watch the Food Network for 4 or 5 hours in a row because it's not that they don't want food, it's just that they are obsessed with food. And the same thing with compulsive overeaters. So it is very similar in some ways. Now, the problem is, I think people have more empathy towards anorexics or even bulimics than they do towards realizing and recognizing that compulsive overeating and obesity is an eating disorder. When you see somebody that's 5'3" and weighs 69 pounds,
right,
it's very visceral, the response that you have to that person. But when you see somebody that's overweight, I think people tend to be of the opinion that they've done this to themselves, that they've made their own bed, and they just don't recognize that this is as much of an eating disorder as anorexia.
Absolutely. Some other tips I like to offer to the people out there that are struggling with obesity is just by eliminating oftentimes the sodas and the colas and fruit juices that we're drinking and replacing that with water, just plain water. You'd be amazed at how many calories that can cut from your current food intake. Making sure that you're drinking at least half your body weight in fluid ounces of water is recommended. And I can tell you from my own experience that as I've helped people get off of a lot of the drinks that they're drinking, you can take in 1,500 calories a day in just drinking Coca-Cola. And oftentimes, just by eliminating that, you can already start to experience more energy and some weight loss. I know that for the obese population, it's hard to go from eating 5,000 calories a day to 1,000. But if you cut back by at least 300 a day and incorporate some exercise, then you can right away start to see results with your program. What would you recommend that the listeners out there do if they're struggling with obesity? What are some of the tips that you have for them?
Well, I think all eating disorders thrive on secrecy. They grow on secrecy. And the more people that you can talk to and tell that, hey, I have a problem, this is getting to me, it's hurting my lifestyle, the more people that you can be open and honest with, it's almost like shining a flashlight in a dark room. It just gives you a chance to have people help you, and people care about you, and at least be able to understand what you're going through. And I think that, and also getting help, talking to professionals,
right,
getting out there and making sure that you're looking at the underlying causes.
Well, I myself have struggled with weight loss my whole life. As I mentioned earlier, I come from an obese family. And, there are 3 different times in your life when your body is producing fat cells. One is when you're in the 3rd trimester of birth. Then one is when you're about 1 or 2 years old, and the other preteen. I know for myself, I know my diet consisted of mostly of cheese during those times in my life. So as for myself, I have a lot of fat cells. It's really hard for me to keep my weight down. So it's something I can empathize with the listeners that are struggling with this. But I can tell you that from seeing my family and how they've struggled, and my sister had her gallbladder removed in early 20s. My father had a heart attack in his early 40s, and my mother struggles with many obesity-related diseases as well. The benefits of just getting on a regular exercise program, on eating healthier foods, really is very beneficial.